Oh, where'd you go? Ceiling fan.
It's lovely, isn't it? I could find it, maybe. Oh, there it is. It's a lot harder than it looks to find a ceiling fan with the phone upside down.
You know, it's weird. I can look over to the side and it doesn't change. Can't see around the edge of the picture.
Hmm?
Oh, so Grace Rose is doing something with something off the edge of the picture. So I was kind of trying to look around to see if I could see around the edge of the picture just without thinking. And you can't do that.
Oh.
Probably good news, but whoa. And Hannah was just going ballistic. All right. I want to talk about a few of these last minute objective things here and see what you have on them. And next week we're going to start practicing math and some of the stuff you'll need for the test. So number 17 was describe the relationship between diversity in an ecosystem and its ability to withstand environmental changes. So actually there's two kinds of diversity. There's species diversity and there's genetic diversity within a species. Both of those can be beneficial to a population's ability. And what do you have? Talk to me. By the way, that's number 17. Did I say that? And there's the ceiling fan again.
Sorry.
She's probably using her phone and has to set her phone down.
So I have diverse ecosystems. They're more resilient and they have a better chance to recover after disturbances. So because they have such a diverse evolution, I guess, they're able to recover from so many things. So if something can't, then another thing will be able to withstand it.
All right, that last part, if one thing can't, another thing likely will be able to. That's a big part of it. So if I've got, and that's one of the problems, by the way, with I say problems. That's why modern farming just would never work in the wild, if you will. A farmer plants a field of all corn. Well, that's great if the conditions are perfect for corn. Farmer plants a field of all alfalfa, which is kind of like the premium hay, highest protein and all that. So a farmer plants field of all alfalfa and it does just fine as long as the conditions are good for alfalfa. But particularly wet summer, the alfalfa will probably drown out. But if a farmer, like in the old days, it would not really be planted, they'd call it a meadow, and it would just be a big field that they cut the grass, whatever grew they cut. That's kind of what I do, mostly because I'm cheap. But they'd cut whatever was there for hay, and if it was a wet summer, one group of grasses would do well, and if it was a dry summer, another group of grasses would do well. And if you had, and I know that just one species is the extreme, but if all you had was alfalfa, normal summer does well, dry summer it can exist, wet summer it drowns out. So this idea of having many different species, each one able to do better in a particularly different environment in any given year. Well, what would genetic diversity within a species do for resiliency of a community? Any ideas?
Would probably make it easier for at least some of the species to adapt to whatever thing hits it.
Sure. That's basically it. The more genetic diversity within a species, the better it's able it is to adapt, the more ability it has to adapt. Remember, adaptation works by removing a set of genes for whatever the undesirable trait at that time is. So the more diversity, the more possible combinations of advantageous genes you might have. So that's a good thing. You did well on that. And just so you know, if you haven't noticed, diversity in ecology, the species diversity and the genetic diversity is a really big deal these days. Everyone wants diversity. Yeah, diversity expands to more than just environmentalism, environment, ecology, but like we want diversity in the workforce. But that's just political. Were you able to come up with any examples of, when I say observed, I mean things that we've actually seen, not necessarily that you've actually seen, but were you able to come up with any examples of things, communities that have changed over time? Yes,
I
Josh.
came up with one that I have seen. At my house, we used to have like hundreds of frogs all around the house. And well, not hundreds, but like a lot more than there is now, like 10 years later, which I just think is interesting because like we had a lot of snakes and other things, and then over time through winters and other things, like they've died out for some reason. I really have not been able to figure out why.
Well, interestingly enough, worldwide, there is a decline in frog and toad populations.
Yay!
Yay, what?
I
You
don't
glad the
like
toads are going away? You hate
Yeah.
frogs?
Those and tarantulas.
All right, well, there's two things that go together. All they have in common is you hate them. I guess they're creepy crawlies. I guess they have that in common. There's actually a, I don't know, what would you call it, a program, I guess, by the DNR, Michigan DNR. They have volunteers who go out in the summer, spring through early summer. This may sound odd. They actually listen in a specific area, same area every year, like 5 times a spring or something like that. And they see how many different species of frogs they can identify, and they keep track of, if possible, how many individuals in each species, although there may be more than they can count, and how many species they can. And they're keeping a record of frog populations in Michigan that way. And I don't know if I can find it or not. The workshop, the Michigan Science Teachers Association convention I went to 3 or 4 weeks ago now, I went to a workshop on that, and they actually have a recording of every single kind of frog that lives in Michigan. And they tell you what this kind of frog is, the species is, and they tell you when they're likely to be found and how common they are in Michigan. And it was actually kind of cool, all the different frogs, and you can tell them just by their croak. But anyway, I think I should find that and assign for all of you, especially Hannah, to listen to it 20 times until you can identify all the frogs by. Yeah, I bet you. All right, let's see. We've talked about adaptation before, but it's a worthwhile concept for you to understand. So What's adaptation?
The definition I got is any alteration in the structure or function of an organism or any of its parts that results from natural selection and by which an organism becomes better fitted to survive and multiply in its environment.
All right, so adaptation, adaptation and natural selection are kind of the same thing. Adaptation is a result of natural selection, and it is picking the traits that make them more able to survive and reproduce. And then we define the success of their adaptation by how many offspring they can leave behind, or their reproduction, in other words. And remember, it's not necessarily making something that's bigger or better or stronger. It's just something that can, for whatever reason, um, live better in the environment it finds itself in. Number 22 takes maybe a little more thought. Explain why populations cannot rely on mutations to adapt to an environmental change. Ultimately, if the evolutionist is true, or even if he isn't, or she, for macroevolution to occur, there would have to be mutations. But why can't populations rely on mutations to adapt to an environment?
I think mostly because, oh, sorry. I think
Grace.
mostly because they're random. Go ahead.
Okay, it has to do with random. Yes, go ahead, Grace. Turn your sound on. I think you might be good now. Nope, you don't. I don't have you muted, but your sound on your device is not.
Have it on internal mic. Click on the arrow next to it.
I'm guessing you're using a Chromebook by the fact that, by the way the screen is arranged and it's not flipping all over the place like a cell phone would. Well, you work on wait, every once in a while for a minute it flashes to unmute. So you're changing something there. Well, Grace, we still can't hear you, so you play around with that. And Mallory, are you waving or raising your hand?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I didn't find this on the internet. This is totally just a random, like, Polaris, I guess. But couldn't it partially be because, like, whenever we talk about mutations, we say how long it takes? Couldn't it possibly take too long for the right mutation to come along? So by the time the mutation comes, it's too late for them to be adapted because they might be dead.
Well, that's what they Hannah meant by random. Yes. So great, you get this mutation. Maybe it's what you need to adapt. Maybe it's not. In fact, odds are it's not what you need at that point in time. And by the time the mutation you do need gets there, it's just too late. Because of the randomness, because they show up whenever they show up. Maybe it's what you need, maybe it's not. Let's see. All right, the last objective asks you to identify historical examples of geological, and that would be the Earth, and meteorological, that would be the weather, events that have changed ecosystems. Now, some of these events are more, what should I say? Some of these are probably more speculative than others. And all of them are historical before recorded history. So they would be all maybe a little bit suspect. Some we can agree on more than others. What kind of things do you have? Okay. The flood. I saw Hannah's lips move, but didn't hear her say anything.
Which question are we on? Sorry.
The last one.
Okay.
So obviously the flood would be, from our point of view, from a Christian point of view, a biggie. And actually a worldwide flood as described by the Bible would have an enormous effect on ecosystems. As described in the Bible, it would wipe out the whole entire world. And when I say as described in the Bible, I mean that was the actual purpose, to wipe out the whole world, effectively to wipe out all ecosystems. So it would have had enormous impacts. It would have destroyed the ecosystems. It would have, let's see, it would have completely changed the appearance of the different kinds of animals. In my opinion, this is why things like saber-toothed tigers just all of a sudden disappear off the face of the earth. They just didn't make it, their genetics didn't make it through the flood. It would have had, in my opinion, the flood would have had repercussions afterwards. So if the flood is a result largely of a canopy of water vapor and greenhouse effect, as that water vapor condensed, it would have given off heat, probably would have warmed the atmosphere. Then the Bible says that there was this strong wind that blew for a period of time. And as the water evaporated, that would have done some serious cooling in the atmosphere, which probably would have led to heavy snowfalls at the poles and the ice ages. And ice ages, that would be some of the events that we can agree on. We can't agree on really the when, in my opinion. And I think I said something about this somewhere along the way, and earlier this year, and I think Josh said that his Cedarville class had referred to something that about ice ages. And if I remember, they agreed with me that they happened probably right after the flood, in the period of time right after the flood.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they said for time frame. I would speculate 300 to 500 years after the flood would have been the ice ages. And of course, the evolutionists would put it way back before 6 or 7 or 8,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. So, and way longer than 300 to 500 years. But we can't agree that there were ice ages. Almost certainly, I think I've referred to this already, almost certainly my property is the result of the glaciers. Of course, I'm using the laptop and can't really easily spin it to look out the window. But I told you, I think that house is built on these hills that are sand and gravel. It was probably stuff pushed in front of the glacier. And then out to the north is what used to be a pond. Then it was a swamp, and then they put ditches around it. And that was probably where the actual glacier was and melted, left a pit behind. So, so yeah, what else?
I mentioned the movement in like Peleg's time, which they mention in the Bible, when like the Earth moved, or that's where most creationists theorize it's when the Earth split up, sort of.
Plate tectonics, when the continents shifted apart from each other, and that is an interesting little. It is an interesting little observation. I wish I had that verse right in front of me. It says something about that's when the earth was divided or whatever. That would have had major impacts. And there again, something we can agree on. The whole idea of a supercontinent, a Pangea, some time ago, the evolutionists would probably have that in the millions. We would have that again in relationship with the flood. in my opinion, okay, so the Bible says that the flood came from two sources. The rain that we think might have come from a vapor canopy, and it says the fountains of the deep broke loose or broke forth or something. And we don't understand exactly what that is, but apparently water gushed up from subterranean water gushed up. In my opinion, there we go. So, and Eber was born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his day the earth was divided. That's all it says. I mean, that is just such a, in my mind, begging for more information. The earth was divided. I mean, I don't know what that means. Maybe it means plate tectonics. Maybe it means had something to do with Tower of Babel. I don't know. But whatever it is, the fountains of the deep, subterranean water, if you have huge subterranean water sources that are suddenly evacuated or emptied, the plates of the surface of the earth must have shifted. I think that goes together with the flood. What else did you get? You should get some things that that are primarily evolutionist. I mean, although they're not evolutionary, they're just things that the evolutionists talk about more than we do. What killed the dinosaurs, allegedly? Meteor. There you go, a meteor. That's the prevailing theory. We actually think there may have been 2, maybe 3 serious meteor strikes. And they do have some evidence. The evidence is not, is a lot of it is indirect. But I think personally that the idea of a meteor strike is not totally out of the question. Now here's a really off the wall thought for you. And Josh, excuse me. I will be interested to hear if your Cedarville class said anything about this. But I think it's entirely possible that the flood was started by a meteor, that the meteor that the evolutionists think extincted the dinosaurs may actually have been what started the flood. If there was a vapor canopy surrounding the Earth on top of the existing atmosphere, meteor plunging through that could easily have destabilized it to the point that it would have started to condense. And then a meteor striking the Earth with several equivalent force of several nuclear bombs could have put enough impact on the Earth to start the subterranean, enough pressure on the surface of the Earth to start the subterranean water sources gushing out. So I think it's entirely possible that a meteor is in fact a factor, and that it actually was the cause of the flood. Now, I know a lot of Christians who would say, whoa, 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 that's a natural cause, and the flood was actually supernatural. Well, I think you can have a natural cause to a supernatural event. I mean, so 100 years before the meteor, let's just pretend that a meteor did cause the flood. 100 years before the meteor causes the flood, God says to Noah, start building an ark, tells him how to build it. And Noah builds the ark, and then he tells him how to load the animals. And you got to figure that Noah, unless animals were different than they are now, the animals probably kind of showed up. They would have been pretty difficult for Noah to go catch all of those wild animals. And they all get on the ark, and the door closes, and boom, it starts to rain. The meteor strikes the earth, and it starts to rain exactly when the door closes. Well, isn't that still God's guidance and superintendence? What's the difference between if God says, I'm going to make a natural event, start a chain of events, or if God says, I'm going to supernaturally start a chain of events? I don't know how that makes a difference between whether it's miraculous or not. So anyway, I think the meteor strike may well fit into the whole flood thing also. Any other?
Well,
Yes.
well, it's not mentioned in my class. It makes sense, but it's not. I don't recall that at all being mentioned in the class. Probably because there's not a lot of ways to back up whether or not that was true, because the Bible did not mention some great rock dropping through the sky.
That is absolutely correct. There is no good way to verify that it's true or not. It would fit, but there's no good scientific evidence necessarily for or against it. So it's mostly just my crackpot idea. You think crackpot is funny, Grace? All right. Come up with anything else?
I just kept seeing like volcanoes and storms and droughts.
Oh, sure. There's been a lot of individual things like that. There was actually, in recorded history, the year without a summer, I think they call it, where some volcano blew its top and put so much ash in the air that, I mean, there was a summer, the days got longer, but they didn't get anywhere near as warm as normal. I have a feeling that somebody's probably looking that up right now. But yes, these events, there have been lots of volcanoes and so on that have impacted ecosystems over time to varying degrees. I mean, Mount St. Helen in my lifetime, probably, I guess it would have been before you guys were born, but Mount St. Helen made some very enormous impacts on ecosystems in Washington State. And I mean, like Hawaii, you got to figure Hawaii didn't used to be there. Now it is brand new ecosystems, or at least when the volcanoes, when the islands formed, they were brand new ecosystems. Anything else? All right. Well, I guess that'll do it for this unit as far as we're going to go. I'm not going to give you a test over it. We will start looking at review when we come back next week. Anyway, unless you have any questions or comments, I'll turn you loose, tell you to have a good, what's coming up? Easter. Tell you to have a good Easter. And enjoy the rest of your day.